Miss Roberts unlocked the door. Karen got out. Miss Roberts looked at me and said something like, she's crazy or she's batshit crazy, something like that. Carrie looks at me and said something, said like, she's batshit crazy. And Miss Roberts went over and she was removing the snow from his face. It wasn't until I got very close over to them that I saw Carrie removing the snow from John's face. She straddles John and she lifts up his shirt, and then she lifted up her shirt and went to lay on him. Karen had straddled him and had lifted her shirt and his shirt and was laying on him, and Carrie was screaming at her to get off of him. And I could not believe that that was John laying there. And I was literally just stunned. I mean, there he was. He was just laying flat on his back. I couldn't see much but his face because the rest was snow and Karen was moving over him, but he just looked like just him, but just like frozen. And then Carrie and I made eye contact, and I called 911. At first, I just stood there for a minute because I couldn't believe it was him. And then Carrie Roberts and I made eye contact. And I knew, I was like, all right, I'm going to call 911. But I think I knew in that moment that John, was dead. And Carrie was asking me to go to the car and get, she was yelling to get towels or blankets or something out of the back of our car. And then Carrie was also yelling at me to go to the back of the car to look for blankets and towels. I go over, and at that point, Carrie asks if I can take over doing the compressions. I went back over to Carrie, Karen, and John, and at that point, Carrie asked if I would take over compressions. I, at some points, walk over towards the car, Carrie's car, to get away because they're so loud. So I walked back towards Carrie's car.
The fire or someone responds and arrives on scene, is that correct?
Yes, until the police came.
Took all the burden on himself.
What do you think today, Karen, about everything?
Karen, how did Gemma
Another witness, another instance of perjury, or instances, I'd say.
How do you feel about her change in demeanor?
Change in demeanor? I didn't notice.
From the last trial.
I did not notice.
How did you feel about Karen, did you tell Jen to make that Google search that morning at 6:23?
I did not. I did not tell Jen to make a Google search. I certainly didn't tell her to make the one at 227 either.
What stood out to you most today?
We know all the details. We know all the changes in statements. It's just what will her reaction be, and it's just more of the same. Inconsistencies. Every statement's different. Under oath, not under oath. With the cops are all wrong. This is very similar to what we saw a year ago.
Do you think that she colluded with Carrie Roberts?
Why is she so inconsistent?
Because she's lying.
Do you think she
That's
colluded?
it. Thank you.
Do you think she colluded with Carrie Roberts?
There was influencing going on.
You wanted to find out if she had talked to these particular law enforcement officers and what she had told them so that your story could somehow align or it could inform how you responded to questions that they asked you. Isn't that true?
That's not true. We both know what happened. We don't have to have a story. There's nothing more than me calling and saying, hey, did they come to your house? That's what we did when the media showed up, when Miss Reed's private investigator showed up. We just give each other the heads up, hey, somebody's coming, because we're just like normal moms. We're not used to this.
I'd like to introduce clip 1 and play it for the jury.
looked mortally wounded as far as I could see, but could I have done something that knocked him out and in drunkenness and in the cold didn't come to again?
In this particular moment, you would rub them off at the party.
Yeah, would have had to.
Could you stop, please, Ms. Gilman? I note that the time is 8:23:10. Do you remember the time when you got there?
I didn't make note of it mentally at that time, but I've since learned that, yes.
Is this video that you have just watched consistent with your memory that morning?
Yes.
The cruiser cam is showing two vehicles in the driveway. When you arrived that morning, did you know whose vehicles they were?
At that time, no.
At that time, did you pay any particular attention to either of those vehicles?
No.
If I could show Exhibit 10, please. So does that appear to be a still photo from the video we just watched?
Yes.
And could I have Exhibit 11, please? When you arrived for the wellness check that morning, were you working as an investigator in any way?
No, I was not.
Did you happen to pay any particular attention to the right side of the back of that car that morning?
No, I did not.
And is that photograph a close-up of the previous picture?
Yes.
Does it appear to be a still photo taken from the video on the cruiser that you were driving that morning or that you were in that morning?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
I gave an interview with ABC with Matt Gutman. I think this was whom I gave the interview to, and I said, he asked why was I saying, could I hit him, did I hit him? And I said, yeah, my first thought was I'd been out late, I'd been drinking, and he's in the general vicinity of where I last saw him. I mean, they talk about the left side of the property and the right as if it's, you know, Hammersmith Farms. It's a postage stamp. It's 50 feet. So he's in the front yard to the left of the front door, and no one's coming out of the house. Jen's telling me nobody's seen him. So I'm thinking, Jesus, was I starting to pull away and I ran over his foot? Like, he's roughly where I left him. So yeah, when I found him, I was thinking, did I like clip him somehow? So when John got out of the car at Brian Albert's house, he took my full vodka soda, which is sitting in the cup holder.
You will
The comment.
that.
Is it okay to begin? Okay.
Please.
So this is the phone calls on the 29th. So at 12:35 a.m., the defendant calls John. That phone call is not answered. 12:34:09 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:34:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:35:09 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 12:35:35, the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:36:09 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered.
Trooper Greeno, let me stop you there for a second. Did you look into any internet connection between the defendant's phone and the router and the internet connection at Meadows Ave, John O'Keefe's home that night?
Yes, at 12:36:39 a.m., the defendant's phone auto connects to the Wi-Fi HatsFam 123.
Are you familiar with the router at Mr. O'Keefe's home?
I have not done a look at it in person, but that's the known network that's listed under it. There's two, HatsFam 123 and O'Keefe 74.
Did
Two
you
names.
learn the range that a connection must be in order to connect to his router?
Yes, so depending on the router, it's either a 2.4 gigahertz or a 5 gigahertz radio band, or signal band, I should say. Depending on which one it's connecting to, which band, it's either 150-foot indoor range or up to 300 feet outdoor. So again, when you pull into your home, sometimes you can still be connected to your home Wi-Fi in the driveway.
And again, can you give us the time of the connection between the defendant's phone and Mr. O'Keefe's router at Meadows Ave that night?
Yes, 12:36:39 a.m.
Please continue.
At 12:36:40 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 12:37:08 a.m., the defendant calls John, and voicemail number 1 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman, would you kindly play the voicemail for 12:37:08?
At 12:38:26 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:39:03 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:39:37 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:40:43 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 12:41:35 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 2 is some beeping noises, appears to be a butt dial or accidental call.
Ms. Gilman, could you play the voice message at 12:41:35?
The defendant then texts John O'Keefe at 12:55:31 a.m. on the 29th, "I'm going home." The defendant texts John O'Keefe, "See you later," at 12:55:50 a.m. on the 29th. At 12:58:19 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:58:47 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:59:24 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 3 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
John, I'm here with your fucking kids. Nobody knows what the fuck you are, you fucking pervert.
At 1 a.m. and 26 seconds, the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 1 a.m. 49 seconds, the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 4 is left. It's 1 second call, no sound.
Ms. Gilman?
That was it. The defendant texts John O'Keefe, "Your kids are cucking alone," at 1:02 a.m. on the 29th. Defendant texts John O'Keefe, "I'm back in Mansfield. The kids are home alone," 1:04:14 a.m. on the 29th. At 1:10:17 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 5 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
Yeah, it's 1 in the morning. I'm with your fucking niece and nephew. You fucking pervert. You're a fucking pervert.
At 1:10:44 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 1:12:18 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:12:46 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:13:13 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. Sorry. At 1:14:11 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:14:44 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:10 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. At 1:17:37 a.m., the defendant calls John. So when voicemail 6 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
John, I'm going home. I cannot babysit your niece. I need to go home. You are fucking using me right now. You're fucking another girl. Kim's sleeping next to me. You're a fucking loser. Fuck yourself.
At 1:18:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. At 4:38:14 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:38:49 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:39:39 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:40:05 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:42:05 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:42:54 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:45:10 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:04:27 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:21:28 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:21:58 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:23:26 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 7 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
At 5:24:27 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:25:28 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:26:14 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:28:16 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:28:43 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:29:21 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:29:46 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:30:15 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:30:52 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:31:21 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:36:29 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 6:03:02 a.m., the defendant calls John, and voicemail number 8 is left with some voice and noise and background.
Ms. Gilman, could you play that, please?
Yes, I need someone to for 34 beautiful Vietnam with a man notice now. Yeah. Okay, I know. Where are the blankets? I don't see blankets, Harry. Yes, I need
If we have the lights on, please. I have no further questions.
All right. Mr. Alessi, does this seem like a good time to take the luncheon recess?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Yes.
When you walked out of the bar, how many drinks had you had?
I have had probably about 4, and not 4 that I completed either. I didn't drink maybe more than a few sips at the waterfall.
And 4 drinks you felt fine to drive?
Yep.
Clip 8, please.
Okay.
And is the level of intoxication pretty high here for everybody?
It's happy.
Yeah.
It's
Because you'd had a lot to drink, right?
I wouldn't say I'd have like a normal amount. Like a vodka tonic every 40 minutes.
Okay. And so are you feeling like buzzed? And I'm not judging, I'm just trying to get a sense.
Buzzed.
Yeah.
Clip 9, please.
The final count of my alcohol intakes, probably about 5 or 6 or 4. The drinks that they were pouring me at McCarthy's, which is where I consumed most of the alcohol, was the weakest vodka tonic. It tasted just like all soda water with lime. Not that I need it to be a martini, but it might have had a splash of vodka in it. So I said, John, this drink tastes like it has no vodka in it. He said, just get a shot and mix it yourself. So each drink was being counted as a double. So I would get a vodka tonic and then I would pour a shot into it. So that would count as 2. But frankly, it just felt like a regular cocktail. It was just a really weak pour. So I asked for a shot. So for my taste, it just tasted like that's the normal strength of what a drink should be. So I had maybe 2 or 3 that are being counted as 4 and 6. And I don't know, I felt fine. I felt like I was buzzed. And then there was one drink, the last one that was given to me, which I would have counted as 3, but they're counting as my 6th cocktail. The guys that we were with brought around shots, and they gave me one that I didn't drink, but I poured it in my drink. So that's now my 5th and 6th drinks, with the 7th, which is a shot that all the men did, and I poured it. So that one glass that I'm holding, that I go into the waterfall with, has 3 drinks in it, a vodka tonic and 2 shots. And which is why John said to me, you're not leaving that drink here, like you haven't touched it and just poured a bunch of vodka. He's like, just take it with you, which was something he always did. So then I go into waterfall and I put that drink down and I socialize most of the time. So that would have been my 5th, 6th, and 7th drinks. Then John orders me a drink at the waterfall that I don't drink, that he takes with him. And then there was a round of shots that Chris Howard bought that I did take. So that would have been the night. But I did not consume 9 vodka martinis or take 9 shots, depending on how you count it. And the last 2 drinks I didn't touch.
Clip 10, please.
I mean, I'm not as clear as I would be if I hadn't been drinking. I mean, I had drank, so, and that led me to question, like, could I have hit him? Did I run over his foot or hit him in the knee? Did I incapacitate him? I mean, I always drive with my music blasting ever since I was 16. And I know when John got out of the car to go into Fairview, I know my car was blasting because when I got in it the next morning to go look for him, I had to immediately turn it down. And I don't know, it's stormy. I have had a few cocktails. I didn't black out, but I wasn't as lucid as I would have been if I had gone to bed at 9 and drank a tea. But so I was fuzzier than I would have been if I had had no alcohol.
Clip 11, please.
How did you feel after that many drinks? When you got in the car, did you feel like you could drive, and did you feel how
I wouldn't have gotten on the expressway. I wouldn't have gotten on the expressway at 12:15 on January 29th. I mean, it was quiet. The roads were very quiet. You can see it on the videos. And I was going, you know, when I've had a few drinks and I drive, I always drive extra slow. So I know my alerts aren't as sharp as they should be. But I shouldn't have been driving. But I don't think I was driving. I know I wasn't driving recklessly. I mean, I've got plenty of video of myself driving all over the place. I put my car in John's garage, which is incredibly narrow, and I had a very oversized SUV. You see me, there's a video of me driving through the intersection when we leave Waterfall to go to Brian Albert's, and I was always taught by my father, even when you have a green light, you always should tap the brake. You don't know who's going to run a red. And I see me doing that multiple times between 12 and 1 and 5 and 6 a.m. So I know I was driving safely, not as safely or as alert as I would be if I had no alcohol. But I was not driving recklessly by any measure.
Thank you. Your Honor, may we approach?
Yes. Jurors, there was some confusion with counsel regarding witnesses. So those are the witnesses for today, so we're done for today. Counsel assures me that won't happen again, but more importantly, we're on track. We're on schedule, not going for the rest of the day, won't interfere with our schedule at all. It looks like it's, I can't tell with all the curtains here, but it looks like it's a beautiful day. You'll have a nice afternoon. Tomorrow we'll be going on a view. So for that, we're comfortable clothes. We'll be walking around a little bit. We'll be going by bus, and I'll have more instructions for you tomorrow morning. But please follow those instructions. Do not discuss this case with anyone. Don't do any independent research or investigation into this case. If you happen to see, hear, read anything about this case, please disregard it and let us know, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. Remember, tomorrow's a holiday.
All rise for the court, please. Jurors, close your notebooks and follow me.
Jury has exited the courtroom.
All right.
Please be seated.
Mr. Brennan, have you had an opportunity to think about whether experts should be permitted to either be present or watch the proceeding? And I also want to know, are you expecting to put on any expert testimony tomorrow?
Dr. Fowler will testify tomorrow. I think that should be considered expert testimony. He provides the procedures and protocol for the testing of blood serum.
Okay.
So I think he's technically considered an expert, although one of the briefer ones.
All right. Does the defense want an expert to be able to watch that? All right. So I know we've had a lot going on this morning. Do you want to address this tomorrow? When do you want to address whether experts should be present?
If I can address it tomorrow morning, I can consider
All right.
it.
We'll
Arguing over the plumber situation.
Do you know if there's any vulgarities that day?
No.
Do you know if there's any vulgarities that night?
No, not to my knowledge.
Do you know whether or not John was trying to end the relationship with Miss Reed?
Objection.
Do you know that, sir?
No.
Next question.
Do you know if there was any jealousy in that relationship?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
I mean, I mean, Karen wouldn't let, I mean, they did everything together, a lot of things together, and I thought at times, yeah, you could see, you know, she didn't want other women around John. I don't know, not at that, but.
Thank you.
Any follow-up?
Nothing further.
All right, Mr. Cameron, you're all set, sir.
Thank you.
I'll see counsel at sidebar for just a minute, please.